Adrian Cole was the man everyone in the city envied. His name echoed through boardrooms, his face appeared in glossy magazines, and his success stories were whispered among ambitious entrepreneurs who dreamed of becoming like him. At just 36, Adrian had built a business empire that spanned luxury hotels, tech investments, and international trade. When he entered a room, heads turned, not merely because of his towering presence, but because he carried the aura of someone who always won. His mansion on the outskirts of the city stood as a symbol of wealth itself. A gleaming white structure of glass and marble, surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens, exotic cars lined up in the driveway, and an infinity pool that sparkled under the sun. Inside, chandeliers imported from Italy glittered across vast halls, while priceless paintings adorned the walls. For his guests, stepping into Adrian's home was like stepping into another world, a world of opulence and abundance. Every weekend, the mansion transformed into the center of nightlife. Celebrities, politicians, and high-profile businessmen gathered for lavish parties. Champagne flowed endlessly, laughter and music filled the air, and people toasted to Adrian's success. To the outside eye, his life was perfect, a dream woven out of money and power. But when the guests left, when the lights dimmed, and when Adrian found himself alone in his sprawling house, silence pressed down on him like a weight. The laughter of others still echoed faintly in the empty corridors, but his own heart remained untouched by the joy he offered so freely to others. For behind the smile he wore in public, Adrian carried a shadow, a gnawing emptiness that not even all his millions could fill. Late at night, he often wandered through his study, standing before the large glass window that overlooked the city skyline. His reflection in the glass mocked him, a man who had everything yet felt he had nothing. He had won every business deal, crushed every competitor, and bought every luxury he desired, but he had lost something far more precious years ago. Something, or rather, someone, his heart never stopped aching for. Her name was Lila. Adrian rarely spoke it aloud, but in the quiet of his solitude, it echoed in his mind. She had once been the center of his world, the woman who made him feel human instead of a machine driven by ambition. She was not from his world of riches and influence. She was simple, genuine, and full of life. With her, he had known happiness untainted by wealth. With her, laughter had been real. And with her, he had lost the only chance at love that felt true. It wasn't a clean break, it was a wound that had never healed. Years had passed, fortunes had grown, but regret lingered like a shadow at his side. When he closed his eyes, he still saw her smile, and when he opened them, he wondered what his life might have been if he had chosen differently. Adrian Cole had everything money could buy. But what haunted him most was the one thing money could never bring back, Lila. The rain came down in sheets, pelting against the windshield of Adrian Cole's sleek black Bentley as he drove through the nearly deserted streets. The wipers swished rhythmically, clearing his view of the city drowned in water. It was late, well past midnight, and the once bustling avenues now lay quiet, glistening under the glow of streetlights. Adrian preferred these late-night drives. They gave him space to breathe, away from the constant noise of business meetings, social obligations, and the suffocating demands of being Adrian Cole, the untouchable millionaire. He loosened his tie, sighing as he stopped at a red light. The rain drummed harder, and for a moment he simply leaned back, letting the hum of the car fill the silence. That was when he noticed movement on the corner of the street. At first, it was nothing unusual. A cluster of beggars often gathered at intersections, hoping for loose change from late-night drivers. But something about the small group caught his attention. A woman sat on the cold, wet pavement, her arms wrapped protectively around two small children huddled against her. Their clothes were soaked, their tiny hands shivering, yet the woman's voice rose above the sound of rain. She wasn't begging in the loud, desperate way others did. She spoke softly, almost soothingly, as though trying to comfort the children despite their misery. Something in her posture tugged at him. The way she curved her body around them, shielding them from the storm, felt oddly familiar. Adrian leaned forward slightly, curiosity sparking within him. Then, as if compelled by fate, the woman turned her head. Time seemed to stop. The traffic light blurred, the rain vanished from his awareness, and all that remained was the face illuminated by the flickering glow of the street lamp. It was her. Lila. Adrian's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles whitened. For a heartbeat, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. It had been years, long, painful years, since he had last seen her. He had convinced himself that she had moved on, perhaps married someone who could give her a better life, or at the very least built a future far away from him and the chaos his family once caused. But here she was, on the wet pavement of a dark street, with 2 children pressed against her sides. His chest constricted. The Lila he remembered was vibrant, full of laughter and fire. Now, her face looked thinner, worn by hardship. Her once bright eyes carried exhaustion, and yet, beneath the weight of suffering, the same strength remained. She held her children tightly, whispering something he couldn't hear, as if she was willing them to believe everything would be okay. Adrian's heart pounded. Questions slammed into him all at once. How had she ended up here? Who were those children? Where was her family, her support, her joy? The green light flashed, and a car behind him honked impatiently. Adrian didn't move. He was frozen, staring at her, unable to look away. The honking grew louder, snapping him back to reality. He pressed his foot on the gas, but not to move forward. Instead, he pulled over to the side of the road, rain splashing against the pavement as he stopped the car. For a moment, he sat still, gripping the wheel, his mind spinning. The image of Lila sitting in the rain burned into him. The city around him blurred into insignificance. He couldn't simply drive away. Not now. Not when fate had thrown her back into his life in such a cruel, unexpected way. Adrian Cole, the man who had everything, felt his world tilt dangerously. Because on that rain-drenched street, he had just seen the woman he had loved more than anything, broken and begging. And nothing could have prepared him for the storm raging inside his chest. Adrian's car idled at the side of the road, rain still pelting against the roof as he sat frozen, staring through the rearview mirror at the faint silhouette of Lila in the distance. His pulse thundered in his ears. The present blurred, and before he could stop it, his mind dragged him backward, back to a time when her laughter filled his world, when the name Lila was not tied to sorrow but to joy. They had met in the most unexpected way. Adrian, still in his early 20s, had been at university, a young man with wealth, status, and a future already planned for him. Lila had been there on a scholarship, her modest background setting her apart from the designer-clad students around her. She wore simple clothes, carried books that had been handed down through many years, but her eyes carried light. She wasn't intimidated by his world, nor impressed by his family name. She was authentic, unafraid to speak her mind, and Adrian had been drawn to her like a moth to flame. Their connection was instant. What began as late-night study sessions turned into stolen moments beneath oak trees, whispered conversations in libraries, and endless hours of laughter that seemed to belong only to them. Adrian, who had grown up in a world where affection was calculated and love was often transactional, found himself captivated by the purity of her heart. They dreamed shamelessly. Lila wanted to teach, to touch lives, to make a difference in ways that money couldn't. Adrian wanted to build a business of his own, free from the shadow of his father's empire. Together, they imagined a simple but beautiful future, a small home filled with laughter, children playing in the yard, evenings where love was enough. But reality was not so forgiving. The Cole family was powerful, proud, and deeply conscious of reputation. His mother, Eleanor Cole, was the matriarch, a woman with a steel spine and a heart hardened by years of guarding her family's name. When she discovered Adrian's relationship with Lila, her disapproval was swift and merciless. "She is beneath you," Eleanor had spat one evening, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you want to ruin everything your father built for you? A girl with no name, no wealth, no connections? Love, Adrian, does not buy respect in society." Adrian had argued, of course. He had fought for Lila, insisting that she was more than enough. But every word was met with icy silence, cutting remarks, and reminders of duty. His father, though quieter, had made it clear that if Adrian chose Lila, he would lose his inheritance, his standing, and his future in the empire they had prepared for him. The tension escalated until it became unbearable. Adrian would come to meet Lila with shadows under his eyes, torn between the woman he loved and the family that held his world in its grip. Then came the breaking point. One evening, Lila arrived at their usual meeting place, her face pale and eyes filled with hurt. She carried a letter, one she claimed had been delivered to her. In it, Adrian had supposedly written that he was tired of her, that she was holding him back, that he could no longer continue their relationship. The words were cruel, piercing, and nothing like him. Adrian swore he had never written it. He begged her to believe him. But the evidence was there, his signature, his handwriting, carefully forged to perfection. His mother's hand lingered all over the scheme, but Lila didn't know that. She looked at him that night as though she had lost everything. "If this is how little I mean to you, Adrian," she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks, "then I have no reason to stay." No matter what he said, she walked away. And Adrian, young, furious, but cornered, did not chase her. His mother's words echoed like poison in his mind, convincing him that perhaps letting Lila go was the only way to protect her from the cruelty of his family's world. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and she was gone. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just absence. Adrian buried himself in ambition, building the empire his parents demanded, wearing success like armor to hide the hollow wound inside him. But no amount of wealth could drown out the truth. He had chosen ambition over love. And in doing so, he had lost the only person who had ever made him feel whole. Now, years later, staring at her drenched figure on the street, Adrian realized that the wound he thought had scarred over had never healed at all. It was open, raw, and bleeding, as if no time had passed since that night she walked away. Lila sat on the cold pavement, the rain seeping through her threadbare clothes as she held her children close. Her arms ached, but she refused to loosen her grip. Ethan pressed into her side, trying to be brave despite the shiver in his small body, while Sophie buried her face against her chest, whimpering softly. Lila rocked her gently, murmuring lullabies that once comforted her as a child. She would not cry, not in front of them. The years had not been kind to her. When she walked away from Adrian all those years ago, her heart had been shattered but still full of hope. She had believed she would find happiness elsewhere, that somewhere beyond the pain of betrayal, love was waiting for her. And for a while, it seemed true. She met Marcus, a man who spoke with charm and carried promises like gifts. He told her she deserved the world, that he would protect her, cherish her, and build a family with her. But the man she thought would heal her wounds only deepened them. At first, Marcus was sweet. Flowers, laughter, and long walks filled their early days. Lila thought she had found someone who saw her beyond her scars. But slowly, his mask slipped. His words turned sharp, his hands turned cruel, and his affection was replaced by bitterness. He resented the responsibilities of family life, and when Ethan was born, Marcus's patience thinned further. By the time Sophie arrived, he had already begun disappearing for days at a time, returning only to lash out with anger or demand what little money Lila managed to save. The final blow came when he abandoned them entirely. One morning, he was gone, no note, no farewell, just absence, like a shadow vanishing at sunrise. He left her with nothing but 2 hungry children and debts she couldn't repay. Lila tried everything to survive. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes in diners, and begged for part-time work that never lasted long. But jobs were scarce, and without references or support, each door seemed to slam in her face. Slowly, painfully, she was pushed into the life she now lived, sitting on pavements, holding out her hand, asking strangers for coins to feed her children. Yet through it all, she clung to one thing: dignity. She refused to see herself as worthless. She never allowed Ethan or Sophie to think they were less than anyone else. Each night, when they huddled together under warm blankets, she reminded them of stories where heroes rose from nothing. She told them that kindness mattered more than money, that their hearts were worth more than gold. Ethan, now 8, had grown wise beyond his years. He often tried to comfort her, whispering, "Don't worry, Mama, I'll take care of Sophie." She saw the determination in his eyes, the same fire she once had, and it broke her heart that a child so young had to think of survival. Sophie, at 5, was softer, more innocent, but she, too, was beginning to understand. When she saw other children with bright clothes and toys, she didn't ask why she couldn't have them. She only held tighter to her mother's hand, as if she feared losing her too. Lila knew the world judged her. People walked past with looks of pity or disdain, whispering as though she had chosen this life. But what they didn't see was the strength it took to keep standing, to keep smiling at her children, to keep living when despair threatened to crush her. Tonight, as rain poured down and her body trembled from cold, she whispered to herself the same vow she had made countless times: "I will not give up. For them, I will endure anything." She kissed Sophie's damp hair and stroked Ethan's cheek, ignoring her own hunger, her own weariness. They were her reason, her anchor, her light in the darkest of nights. And though she sat on the ground, reduced to begging, there was still a quiet dignity in her. A resilience that life's cruelties had not destroyed. Because Lila was broken, but not defeated. Adrian lay awake in his massive bedroom, the soft glow of the chandelier casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside calm and silent, but inside his chest a storm raged on. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Lila returned, the curve of her body shielding her children from the rain, the exhaustion etched on her face, the quiet strength in her eyes despite her suffering. He turned over restlessly, the silk sheets suffocating rather than comforting. For years, he had tried to bury her memory beneath layers of success, wealth, and distraction. But tonight, fate had ripped away the covers, exposing wounds he thought had long healed. Seeing her on that street had shattered the illusion of control he prided himself on. By dawn, his patience had run out. He pressed the intercom and summoned Victor, his trusted driver and aide. "Find her," Adrian ordered quietly, his voice sharp with a desperation he rarely revealed. "Discreetly. I want to know where she goes, how she lives, everything. But do not approach her. Do you understand?" Victor, loyal and efficient, did not question him. Within hours, he returned with information that made Adrian's chest tighten painfully. Lila lived in abandoned shelters when she could, sometimes in makeshift camps near the edge of the city. She had no stable job, no support system. Every day was a battle to keep her children fed and safe. The man who should have protected her, Marcus, had not only abandoned her but left her in debt, leaving her to fend for herself. Adrian listened in silence as Victor laid out the details. Each word cut deeper, each revelation heavier than the last. By the time Victor finished, Adrian could barely speak. He dismissed him with a nod, then sank into the leather chair in his study, burying his face in his hands. Guilt consumed him. He had walked away once, years ago, letting his family's manipulations push Lila out of his life. And while he had gone on to build empires and accumulate billions, she had been forced down a path of pain and poverty. Was it coincidence, or was it the ripple effect of his failure to fight for her? Had his silence, his cowardice, paved the way for the misery she now endured? The thought twisted inside him like a knife. Logic tried to claw its way through the storm. "Don't interfere," it warned. "Her life is hers now. You cannot undo the past. If you step in, you will only complicate her world further." But his heart rebelled. It screamed at him, "You can't abandon her again. Not now. Not when she's broken, when she needs someone. Not when those children, her children, sit shivering in the cold." He paced the room, torn in two. He was Adrian Cole, a man who made decisions with precision and certainty. Yet tonight, he was just a man haunted by love, by regret, by the sight of the only woman he had ever truly cared for, reduced to begging on the streets. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. The next morning, Adrian's resolve hardened. The sleepless night had left his face drawn, but his mind was clear. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. He had spent his life making decisions that altered markets, industries, and futures. Yet none had ever felt as heavy as the one he was about to make, approaching Lila again. He instructed Victor to drive him back to the same intersection where he had seen her. The city was alive with movement now, vendors calling out their wares, traffic inching forward in bursts of chaos. Yet even in the crowd, Adrian spotted her easily. She sat against the damp wall of a closed shop, Ethan pressed against her side while Sophie played with a small piece of string as if it were a treasure. Adrian stepped out of the car. The tailored lines of his suit, the shine of his shoes, and the weight of his presence turned heads immediately. He walked with purpose toward her, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. Lila looked up. For a moment, her eyes widened, recognition flashing across her face. Then her expression hardened, and she straightened her back, pulling her children closer as though shielding them from him. "Lila," Adrian said softly, his voice carrying both relief and hesitation. She said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Take this. It's money. Enough to get you through, at least for a while. You shouldn't be here, not like this." Her reaction was immediate. Her hand lashed out, knocking the envelope from his grip. It fell onto the wet pavement, bills spilling across the ground. Ethan and Sophie stared silently, wide-eyed. "I don't need your pity," Lila spat, her voice trembling with both anger and pain. "Do you think you can walk back into my life after all these years and throw money at me like I'm some problem to fix?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "It's not pity, Lila. It's guilt. It's regret. I saw you, and I couldn't just." "Regret?" Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "Where was that regret when I needed you? When your family tore us apart, when lies were whispered into your ear until you believed them over me? You abandoned me, Adrian. Don't stand here now pretending to care." Her words cut deep, reopening wounds he had tried to bury. He swallowed, fighting to keep his composure. "I never stopped caring. I made mistakes, yes. I was young, weak, and afraid of losing everything my family threatened to take away. But that doesn't mean I didn't love you." Lila shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Love doesn't walk away. Love doesn't let lies win. You chose them. You always chose them." Adrian's gaze shifted briefly to the children. Ethan watched him with cautious curiosity, his young face unreadable, while Sophie clutched her mother's arm, sensing her distress. Their silence spoke louder than any words. They were old enough to understand something heavy lingered between their mother and this stranger, yet too young to grasp its depth. "I just want to help," Adrian whispered, his voice raw. "Not for me, not to fix the past, just for you and the children. You don't deserve this life." Her reply was sharp. "What I don't deserve is you standing here, reopening wounds I've worked years to scar over. If you truly cared, you would leave us alone." The rejection stung, but Adrian didn't move. He wanted to argue, to plead, to explain, but he saw the steel in her eyes, the kind born only from years of suffering. Finally, he bent down, picking up the scattered bills, his hands trembling. He placed the envelope gently beside her, not meeting her gaze. "You may hate me, Lila. But I won't stop trying to make this right," he said, his voice low. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked back toward the car. Behind him, Ethan and Sophie remained silent, their eyes following him, as though sensing that this man was not just another stranger in their world of passing faces. Adrian could not focus on anything the following day. The boardroom's chatter faded into meaningless noise, figures and contracts blurred before his eyes. His empire, the billion-dollar machine he had built, seemed trivial compared to the storm raging inside him. The image of Lila's defiance, her voice sharp with pain, replayed endlessly in his mind. But so did the sight of the boy, Ethan. There was something about the boy's eyes, the way he held himself, that gnawed at Adrian's soul. That night, alone in his study, Adrian opened his laptop and began searching. He had resources at his disposal that most could only dream of: investigators, lawyers, endless networks of information. He told himself it was concern, not obsession, but deep down he knew the truth. He needed answers, not just about Lila, but about the children who clung to her side. Within hours, his investigator returned with files. Adrian's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through them. The truth of Lila's life since she had vanished from his world unfolded in black and white. After leaving him, she had eventually married Marcus Hale, a man with a charming smile and a reputation that hid darker truths. At first, Marcus had appeared stable, working small jobs and providing the illusion of security. But soon his record revealed itself: gambling debts, failed ventures, and accusations of domestic violence whispered by neighbors who were too afraid to intervene. Lila looked at him, torn between disbelief and the faintest flicker of hope. For the first time in years, the wall around her heart trembled. The announcement came not with words, but with action. One morning, the gates of Adrian Cole's sprawling mansion swung open, and for the first time in decades, the tabloids found themselves gifted with the kind of scandal that could topple reputations. Cameras captured the moment when Adrian stepped out of his sleek black car, and from the other side, Lila emerged, her clothes modest but freshly laundered, her children clutching her hands nervously. Adrian didn't bother sneaking them in. He didn't whisper or hide behind tinted windows. Instead, he walked proudly at her side, the picture of defiance, as the media swarmed. Within hours, headlines exploded. Millionaire Adrian Cole brings street beggar and children into mansion. Forgotten love or opportunistic scandal. Society's golden son risks it all for a mystery woman. For high society, this was nothing short of blasphemy. Adrian was their golden child, the man who threw gala dinners, funded art exhibitions, and smiled in photographs beside senators and CEOs. To them, his world was built on exclusivity, refinement, and perfect appearances. And now, he had shattered that image by embracing someone they deemed unworthy. The first to react, unsurprisingly, was his mother. Eleanor Cole stormed into the mansion that very evening, her heels striking the marble floor like gavel blows. She found Adrian in the sitting room, where Lila sat with Sophie curled in her lap and Ethan quietly exploring the shelves lined with books. "Adrian Cole." Eleanor's voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding. "What on earth do you think you're doing? The press is in a frenzy, our family's name is being dragged through the mud, and all because of..." Her glare turned to Lila, cold and venomous, her. Lila's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't look away. Years of hardship had taught her not to flinch, even when insulted. "She's the mother of my children," Adrian replied firmly, his voice calm but steely. "And she belongs here." Eleanor's face turned red with fury. "Mother of your children? You mean to tell me these two," she gestured at Ethan and Sophie with disdain, "are yours? Do you know how this looks? She's nothing but an opportunist, clinging to you now that she sees wealth within her grasp." The words stung Lila, though she hid it. Ethan looked up, confused, and Sophie buried her face against her mother's chest. Adrian rose to his feet, towering over his mother. For years, he had bowed to her will, let her dictate the terms of his life, and sacrificed love to appease her. But this time was different. His voice thundered through the room. "Enough. You will not speak of her that way. Lila is not an opportunist. She is the woman I loved, the woman I should never have let go. And those children are mine, which makes them your grandchildren. You can either accept that truth, or you can walk out of this house and never come back." The silence that followed was electric. Eleanor's lips trembled, her pride warring with the shock of her son's defiance. She had never seen him this way, unyielding, protective, unashamed. The confrontation spread like wildfire through society. Dinner parties buzzed with gossip, business associates whispered behind closed doors, and journalists speculated endlessly. Was this true love rekindled? Or a man's midlife crisis gone too far? But Adrian didn't care. He took Lila and the children to charity galas, introduced Ethan as his son, and openly held Lila's hand in front of flashing cameras. Every photograph, every headline, every whisper only solidified his stance. He was no longer the man who lived for appearances. He was the man who fought for love and family, no matter the cost. And though the world reeled in scandal, Lila felt something shift inside her, a cautious hope. For the first time in years, she was not hidden in the shadows. Adrian had chosen her, not in secret, but before the entire world. The Cole mansion, with its grand chandeliers, polished marble, and endless hallways, felt more like a museum than a home to Lila. Every corner whispered of wealth and privilege, things that had once been within her reach but had slipped away like smoke. Now, walking through those glittering halls in her simple clothes, she felt the weight of eyes, maids, butlers, and society itself, judging her presence. Though Adrian had brought her here with conviction, Lila couldn't shake the feeling of being an intruder. She still flinched at the fine cutlery during dinner, still hesitated before sitting on couches that looked more like displays than furniture. Every time she caught sight of herself in the mansion's ornate mirrors, she saw not the woman who once dreamed of belonging to this world, but the broken survivor who had spent years begging on cold streets. The children, however, adapted with ease. Sophie, with her boundless curiosity, was enchanted by the mansion's gardens, fountains, and playrooms. Within days, she called Adrian Papa with a sweetness that melted even the sternest servants. Adrian would often find her tugging at his hand, eager to show him a dollhouse or demand that he join her tea parties. He obliged every time, his laughter echoing through halls that had long been silent. Ethan, older and more guarded, was harder to reach. He watched everything with a quiet, assessing gaze, as though waiting for the ground beneath him to crumble. Adrian noticed the boy's reluctance to engage, and it pained him deeply. One evening, he found Ethan sitting alone in the library, staring at the spines of books he was too afraid to touch. "Do you like to read?" Adrian asked gently, taking a seat across from him. Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes. We didn't have books before." Adrian smiled, pulling a volume from the shelf and placing it before the boy. "This one was my favorite when I was your age. My father used to read it to me." For a moment, Ethan's guarded eyes softened. He opened the book hesitantly, and Adrian began reading aloud. The boy listened in silence, his small hands gripping the pages. By the time Sophie wandered in and curled up beside them, Ethan had inched closer, resting his head lightly against Adrian's arm. It was a fragile, tentative connection, but it was a beginning. Lila watched from the doorway, unseen. Her heart ached at the sight. For years, she had carried the burden of raising her children alone, with no father to lean on, no partner to share the weight. Now, to see Ethan slowly lowering his guard and Sophie's joy lighting up the mansion, it stirred something inside her she had fought to bury. Still, she wrestled with doubt. Could she trust Adrian? Or was this another fleeting act of defiance against his family, a gesture he would one day regret? Late one night, as she stood on the balcony gazing at the gardens, Adrian approached quietly. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said softly. "But I meant what I told my mother. You and the children belong here. With me." His sincerity was disarming. She turned to him, eyes searching his face, and for the first time in years she saw not the cold, ambitious man who had abandoned her, but the young man she once loved, the one who whispered promises of forever under starlit skies. Lila didn't answer, but when Adrian reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. And in that simple silence, a wound that had festered for years began, at last, to heal. The mansion had just begun to feel like a place of healing when shadows stirred behind its gilded walls. Adrian's mother, Eleanor Cole, had not accepted defeat. In public she wore the mask of grace, attending luncheons and charity galas with a practiced smile, but in private, bitterness festered. To her, Lila was not a woman deserving of love, but a stain threatening to tarnish the family's legacy. Behind closed doors, Eleanor began weaving her final web of betrayal. She reached out to her vast network of lawyers, men who owed her favors, and quietly arranged for a legal challenge. "The boy isn't his," she whispered, sliding stacks of money across polished tables. "Find proof. Discredit her. Paint her as unfit." The lawyers promised results, their signatures secured by greed rather than justice. At the same time, she fed poisonous stories to the tabloids. Photographs of Lila on the streets, begging with her children, suddenly appeared on glossy covers. Headlines screamed, "Gold digger in the mansion" and "Millionaire heir fooled by beggar's lies." Reporters camped outside the gates, shouting questions that pierced Lila's fragile peace. Inside, Lila's world began to fracture. She had endured the cruelty of poverty, the sting of abandonment, but this was different. This was war waged with influence, wealth, and lies. Every article that branded her opportunistic made her stomach churn. Every rumor that painted her children as unwanted parasites cut her deeper than any wound her abusive husband had left. One night, she found herself sitting by Ethan's bed, watching him sleep. His brow was furrowed even in rest, the burden of whispers at school already haunting him. Sophie clung tighter to her stuffed toy these days, asking if the mean people outside would take her away. The thought tore Lila apart. She couldn't allow her children to suffer because of her. Adrian noticed her silence growing heavier, her eyes clouded with worry. "You're thinking of leaving," he said quietly one evening, finding her by the window where raindrops streaked the glass. Her lips trembled. "I won't let your mother destroy them. I've survived pain before, Adrian, but they don't deserve this. If leaving means protecting them, then I will." Adrian's chest tightened at her words. The fear in her voice was real, the same fear that had driven her away years ago when his family first tore them apart. He reached for her, voice firm yet desperate. "You won't face this alone, Lila. Not this time. She can try to buy the courts, she can poison the world with lies, but she cannot take what's ours." But Lila, worn from battles fought and lost, wasn't sure. Trust was fragile, and Eleanor's power was immense. As the storm raged outside, Lila's heart battled with a single question: was staying worth risking her children's peace, or was leaving the only way to keep them safe?